All righty. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Empowered Through TBI podcast. I'm Joanne Phillips, founder of Empowered Through TBI. For those who don't know me, I'm also a survivor of a severe traumatic brain injury. In 2007, I was struck by a car at 35 miles an hour. Here at Empowered Through TBI, we believe in empowering the traumatic brain injury community as well as their caregivers with information and resources. So today I have the honor yet again to interview Dr. Terry Wahls. For those who don't know Dr. Wahls is an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner and a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa, where she conducts clinical trials. In 2018, she was awarded the Institute for Functional Medicine's Linus Pauling Award for her contributions in research, clinical care, and patient advocacy. She's also a patient with progressive secondary multiple sclerosis and confined her to a wheelchair for 4 years. Dr. Wahls restored her health using a lifestyle and diet program specifically for her brain, and now pedals herself to work every day. She's the author of the best-selling book, The Wahls Protocol, A Radical New Way to Treat Chronic Autoimmune Conditions Using Paleo Principles. She also authored The Wahls Protocol, Cooking for Life. And now on March 17th, correct me if I'm wrong, you're set to launch your new and updated revised book of, here we go, The Wahls Protocol, A Radical New Way to Treat all chronic autoimmune conditions using the paleo principles. Thank you and welcome back, Dr. Wahls. A lot has happened in the last couple months that you and I last chatted, and not only are you getting to release this book here in the next couple days, but they also put you on a segment on the doctors.
Yeah, that was
how was that? How was that? I watched it. How was that?
Yeah, that was pretty fun. We certainly got a lot of attention, and there's a lot more recognition that, the science has come a long way, and we do clinical research testing this question: what impact does diet and lifestyle have for the MS patient? So,
yeah, and then you also there was a patient on there too that had MS, and really using your protocol changed her trajectory of becoming a nutritionist and also moving on in that industry as well. It was really powerful. So when I read your book, I read the books very close together. So I saw how you evolved on certain topics, and I would love for you to speak to those things that you evolved on in those areas.
So I have a deeper conversation about how we grow our internal motivation, because the biggest reasons that people fail is that they can't let go of the foods to which they're addicted and begin eating these radical things known as vegetables. And so the chapter on behavior change and how we grow our motivation, that's much more robust, looking at the science of behavior change, food addiction, and how we can grow our emotional resilience. And then in the dietary chapters, I have a longer conversation about FODMAPs, histamines, oxalates, who needs to think about those issues, and if so, how do we modify the diet to address those issues? And then we talk more about ketosis, in that I recommend ketosis for a much more narrow group of patients. In general, I prefer that people have a more seasonal ketosis or intermittent ketosis. So we'll talk about that. How to determine, are you a part of the group that I want to be in ketosis long-term, or are you in the group that I'd rather be in ketosis intermittently? And if so, what are the various strategies to achieve that? We've had a lot of progress on neurorehabilitation, which of course would speak deeply to your community. And we discussed the advances in neurorehab, the advances in electrical stimulation of muscles, neuromuscular reeducation, and constrained limb therapy. So that's good. I've updated the supplement chapters. There are a few things that I don't recommend anymore. We've added some new ones that I think are worth considering. And then again, talk more about how we enhance our metabolic resilience and what are the things that we can do to improve that. And the other thing I would say is, the other thing that people are reaching out and talking to me a lot about now is the COVID-19 issues. And what can we do to help lower the risk of having a severe reaction to the COVID-19 and having more severe disease that will lead to the viral pneumonia and need for intubation.
Well, it's interesting because what I really love is and it's funny because you talk about the resilience. This is exactly where I'm going to go with you, on topic with you about the various resilience and stress. But I just want to just backtrack a little bit because I love the way you present ketosis. In the industry of functional medicine, we're kind of guilty with this one size fits all for everybody. And I think there's some issues. And when you talk about ketosis, you present it in such a responsible way of understanding that it may not be for everybody, some limitations, and it can be a home run for some people. And I love,
absolutely.
Yeah. And I love the responsibility that you had towards that topic because it's so big now. And
it is very big. People are embracing it. Acutely, it's really great. It's like a super fuel for your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first went into ketosis, I felt tremendous. It really was quite marvelous. But over time, I got to be much more respectful that this is a much more complicated, nuanced circumstance. And when I looked at this really from an evolutionary perspective, our ancestors, the Brunhildes and the Beowulfs of my ancestors, thousands of generations ago, they got into ketosis by virtue of physical activity. Mm-hmm. The men were going out hunting, traveling, exerting themselves, for about 2 hours to 3 hours. You've depleted all your glycogen, and you're in ketosis simply by virtue of the work. The ladies were probably in ketosis as well, also because of the virtue of the work. The men, the women, we get back, we get the food, the guys are sort of lazing around, they built the fire, the ladies were preparing the meal, and we now are in the resting and refeeding state. And so we have a couple of days of resting and refeeding, we run out of food, and the cycle begins. We again get into ketosis, but primarily through prolonged physical activity, although intermittently we would have to deal with winter, mm-hmm. with war, with famine, with drought, and we'd be in ketosis for that reason. But most often our ancestors were in ketosis through physical activity. We would never be in ketosis for the rest of our lives.
Yep.
We'd always have a period of rest and refeeding. So from an evolutionary standpoint, I think as a species, we have a lot more experience with intermittent ketosis. And frequently on the basis of physical activity, and then intermittently in more ketosis where we get refed through a high protein meal during winter, because there's no carbs around, but if the hunt is good, you'll have meat. So you'll have seasonal high protein and fat only, or you're starving diets. And then during the summer, a higher carbohydrate intake because now plants are available again.
Yep.
So, but having said that, there are still patients for whom I am willing to say the trade-off for you to leave you in long-term ketosis for the rest of your life is worth doing. But I think my preference is to have us consider the evolutionary biology and create eating patterns that are better, more closely aligned to what our ancestors were probably doing. Mm-hmm. So I feel very comfortable recommending either time restricted feeding or a seasonal ketosis every winter. I think there's every reason to think that for the vast majority of people, we could anticipate that they would do very well with that type of eating pattern. And for a much smaller bunch of people, will I recommend a long-term ketosis for years.
Yeah. And as I said, I think it's got to be a very responsible look at ketogenic diets. I think a lot of people can benefit from the intermittent fasting. Plus it's got impact on increasing brain-derived neurotropic factors and all that other stuff. So there's all these positive things with various calorie restrictions, whether it's full on ketosis or just the caloric restrictions and not eating at a certain
Yeah.
time. You
Well,
know, there's benefits to that.
you know, and calorie restriction for the rest of your life is a pretty difficult ask, because if you're calorie restricted, you're hungry,
Mm-hmm.
and asking someone to be calorie restricted to the point of hunger for the rest of their life, that gets progressively more and more difficult over
Yeah.
time.
I know people are doing these like window eatings where it's a certain amount of time, you know, don't eat
Mhm.
after 6 o'clock. And then they, you know, they'll
Yeah,
maybe do like a 14, like a 12 to 14, 15
12.
hour before they eat again. That type.
So that's time restricted feeding. Generally, that's well tolerated.
Yeah.
Walter Longo's really created another pattern, which is intermittent calorie restriction. He calls
Mm-hmm.
that the fasting making diet. And that's generally pretty well tolerated. So for 5 days or 7 days, you have reduced calories, 500 calories. And you know, people are pretty hungry by the end of the week, and so they're quite glad to eat again. But that's vastly easier than doing a 5 to 7 day water only fast. And I've done that too. And I assure you, by the end of 5 to 7 days of water only, you're pretty hungry. And that's much more complicated, because that you really need to do with pretty close medical supervision. Your physician needs to be involved and closely monitoring you. Plus, it's hard. You're
Yeah.
really quite.
And you got to kind of be healthy enough to do it too.
You have to be healthy,
You
absolutely,
got to
because
be
your
healthy
blood
to do
pressure will
that.
fall, your blood sugar will fall.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on any medications, those will need to be adjusted. If you have any chronic health issues, that needs to be closely monitored. You're going to lose a lot of muscle mass. So that is certainly not something the public should do.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, where I want to go with you, because I'm reading the book and I'm like, okay, where, you know, it's 400 pages, jam packed with information. I'm like, okay, I could talk about this. I could talk about this. But then I got to your chapter 11, which is the managing stress and increasing resilience. And I
Yeah.
loved the way you put that together. And I thought, whether you have a brain injury or not, whether you have an autoimmune disease or not, everybody, and now you add in again COVID-19, you know,
Yeah.
too much stress going on, and it's chronic. And I would love to talk about, I want people to truly understand that, you know, what are we talking about when we're talking about acute stress versus chronic stress, before we go into the 4 different stressors that you talk about in your book,
Yeah.
where we could utilize it to our benefit. I want people to understand the difference between acute stress and chronic stress and what's going on with the autonomic nervous system. I would
Well,
love for you to talk about that.
you might think about I'm out in the wild, and I hear the wolves howling, and I look behind and I see the pack of wolves behind me. Now my stress hormones will all kick up: epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol. The cortisol will release a bunch of blood sugar. Epinephrine, norepinephrine will increase my blood pressure, my heart rate, and so I can see farther, hear better, run faster, and I'm stronger, and I am less sensitive to pain, which is really helpful. So I can run faster from the wolves, or if I have to fight them in hand-to-hand combat, I'll be more effective. As long as I can get away and those hormones can be rapidly metabolized and eliminated, that short burst of cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine is not at all harmful.
Mm-hmm.
But if I can't get back to a rest and recovery period where those hormones are gone, the chronic elevation of those 3 hormones is damaging to my brain. It will shrink my hippocampus, so my memory declines. It damages my blood vessels. I'm more likely to have high blood pressure. I'm more likely to have diabetes. I'm more likely to have anxiety, depression, central obesity, and a wide variety of chronic health problems. So intermittent short stress actually is really, really good for me. It's good for my brain. It's good for my heart, good for my blood vessels. But the chronic stress becomes very, very destructive.
Yeah. So So when we're dealing, and let's face it, most people are in a chronic stress state. And that's the unfortunate thing about most, let's just
Correct.
talk about America. Most Americans are walking around in a chronic state of
And the
stress.
chronic stress. And, I'd also say the absence of stress is also terrible for us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, for example, well, think of gravity. So we're up walking around, that gravity puts stress on my bones, on my muscles, and that is necessary to maintain the bone mineral density. But if I go sit down all day long, if I lay in bed, or if I'm in space and weightless, I don't have that stress in my bones, and my body begins eating and washing away the minerals.
Mm-hmm.
And I develop osteopenia and then osteoporosis. And likewise, my muscles become very atrophied and skinny, and the muscle fibers are smaller and smaller and smaller. So stress is vital, but it needs to be sort of intermittent, followed by intermittent periods of less stress. And so stress is not the problem. It's really more the dose of the stress. So intermittent stress is good, but you also have to have intermittent relaxation, intermittent less stress. If you have zero stress, that's pretty terrible for you as well.
Yeah, because then you don't know how to react to things when they do get stressful. What I wanted, before we go into the 4 types of stress, I do want to talk about, because this is really important, because I know it was 1 year after my accident, my thyroid tanked. I would love for you to speak to, when chronic stress happens, what's going on with that adrenal thyroid that you chat about in the book, because I think it's important for people to understand.
Well, before we do that, I want to comment on the traumatic brain injury and hormones in the adrenals and the thyroids. There's a lot more appreciation that if you've had a traumatic brain injury, that can disrupt the hormonal balancing.
Mm-hmm.
So men in particular are at really high risk to have the sex hormones go down, so the testosterone level will go down, prolactin can go down, thyroid hormones can go down. But men are exquisitely sensitive. Women are somewhat less so. Everyone, we can have problems with the thyroid, we can have problems with adrenal hormones and prolactin. Occasionally you can get growth hormone problems following a traumatic brain injury. And then you can think of our hormones as balancing how we run the metabolism, sort of the efficiency of the chemistry of life. And we rely on the sex hormones, the thyroid hormones, and the adrenal hormones. And if one of those 3 sets of hormones is not working as well, the other 2 sets try and pick up the balance. And one by one, if we are not providing enough reserve, we can deplete the sex hormones, the sex glands, so you don't get as much testosterone and estrogen. And then you can deplete your adrenals and your thyroid and your pituitary. And when they're all depleted, you end up being completely exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
You might think of the thyroid as sort of the, you think of the hair and the turtle. So the thyroid makes very slow adjustments to your metabolism. The adrenals make a more rapid adjustment. And we rely on both to keep our hormones nicely balanced. It's sort of part of why in the fall, 50 degrees feels really cold and we put on our winter coats. And because we've been used to 100-degree weather, 90-degree weather. And so if you got a really cool day, that feels very, very cold. Now here in Iowa, when it's 50 in the spring, you can run out in t-shirts and shorts and feel very, very comfortable. And that's a reflection of the shifts in our hormonal balance that happened over the winter, getting us comfortable in wintertime in that cold weather. It revved up our metabolism so that now when the air temperature goes from being in the 20s up to 50 or 60, that feels very balmy, very warm, very, very pleasant.
Yeah, well, I noticed that too, just being in the industry. people don't really appreciate, I think, when with the traumatic brain injury survivor, the dysregulation of the hypothalamus pituitary and all the hormones. Thankfully, I'm in the field that I'm in where I was able to, stay on top of it as best as I could. Yes, I've had to deal with those fluctuations and correct them, but I'm thinking about majority of people walking around that don't even get that check. They don't even know about this,
Correct.
what's going on.
And
When
many
you think about that,
physicians
go ahead.
many physicians are not aware that after traumatic brain injury, there's this higher rate of drop in testosterone, estrogen, thyroid, prolactin, adrenal hormones. They don't realize it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is part of the problem of the community not getting the appropriate information on what to check, or going to a practitioner that is, functional medicine and well versed in that, where they can rule stuff out. So, either way, this is why I'm trying to do what I'm doing. But when I would love for you to talk about, because this was really interesting to me, the 4 types of stress. We're dealing with the emotional, the physical, the mental, and the metabolic stress. And I love the way you break it down, but also give examples of each of those. Because like you said, the chronic stress is the problem, but these stressors that are more acute, we could really utilize these for ourselves.
Right. We absolutely need to have stress to stay healthy, but we also have to have that rest and recovery period.
Yeah, this is over, right?
Yes. We need to be able to have that as well.
So when you talk about metabolic stress, I would love for you to tell the audience, like, what is metabolic stress, and give us some examples of how people can challenge themselves with metabolic stress.
Well, you might think of the rheostat in your home, where you are looking at the temperatures. And so many of us are living in a very narrow temperature range between 68 and 72 degrees. And because we live in this very narrow temperature range, that we don't have much resilience outside of that. And the more narrow that range is, the lower our resilience. So I talk to people about getting outside every day, experiencing some heat and experiencing some cold. Now, I need you to be sort of sensible about that. But if you can tolerate heat and sweats and saunas, that's really good for you. If you can begin to explore taking a cool shower, then take a cold shower, a cool bath, a cold bath. And one of my routines is to take an ice bath.
Mm-hmm.
Now, most people will have to grow their tolerance for ice water. So you'll start with a cool bath, and over a period of several weeks, get more comfortable with a cold bath. And then you may eventually find that you can get comfortable adding ice to your bath as well. And actually, my dog likes that a lot. He jumps in and he's eating the ice cubes as I do that.
Well, they got fur on. They cheat.
Yeah. So that's that is very helpful. And then in terms of the emotional resilience, I think we are sometimes uncomfortable realizing that we have a whole spectrum of emotions that we experience. And that understanding that we do have sorrow, we do have joy, and that without experiencing sadness, we don't, and loss, we cannot fully appreciate joy and happiness and gratitude. And so I talk a fair amount about gratitude, about finding the gifts in circumstances, what you're going to learn even from the loss and sorrow that you may experience as well. That full spectrum of experience is necessary.
I think the emotional stuff can get hard, because so much of the emotional stuff is, people will think it is the depression, it is the anxiety, it is the things that people are dealing with on a regular basis that kind of stir up that chronic stress. And I love what you wrote about in ways to cope with that, to break that. And I'm somebody that definitely dealt with that emotional stress. Well, so finding a community example, when you can find that community, it's so helpful.
loneliness is very inflammatory. We
Yep.
know it in many disease states that the more lonely we are, the more inflamed we are, the higher the rates of diabetes, obesity, depression, higher rates of cancer. So we talked a lot about the importance of getting community, of getting connection. You can do this through letter writing. You can do it through telephone calls. You can do it through the video phones, internet, Zoom meetings. So find a way to be connected to other humans. Another thing you can do is to be connected to pets, animals, nature. You might be connected to your garden. You might be connected to the trees in your yard. But lack of any connection to other living beings tends to be profoundly inflammatory and very much an accelerant to your disease.
Yeah, and I would think even in the traumatic brain, I think people deal with it in general because again, there's a rampant amount of depression going on in this country, sadly. But with the
Yeah,
traumatic brain injury community, a lot of depression and isolation.
and there's a lot more anxiety and depression in this community, in the country, in the world, because when your brain is inflamed, your microglia are activated.
Hmm.
The biologic response is anxiety and depression. And so it's not something we saw in my lifestyle clinic and in the primary care clinic, is as I taught people to improve the quality of their diet, they discovered that their anxiety often diminished and their depression often diminished. And then as we help them create some more meaning in their life and to get connected with other living beings, be it friends, family, or even pets, again, their anxiety and depression diminished.
Yeah, it's really important that emotional. So we got the metabolic, we got the emotional. Now we're going to go to the physical stress, and you actually chatted about that regarding exercise. And the cool thing about exercise is you're also again increasing those brain-derived neurotropic factors. It's a good thing. There's so many multiple benefits in some of these stressors that are actually beneficial to the brain.
Absolutely. And again, thinking back to our ancestors thousands of generations ago, um, you had to work pretty darn hard to get your food. Whether you were the guys out hunting or the ladies out gathering, um, both sexes did a lot of intense physical activity, followed by an opportunity to rest and relax. So we had stress, and then we had a rest and recovery period, and then we had to go back out and stress again. So I really like to see intermittent physical stress followed by a rest and recovery period. If you're an athlete, that I think our athletes know um, that a hard workout followed by a lighter workout is always where you get your best gains.
So what are you recommending for patients? Like what is your ideal like for exercise
Well,
programs?
what I want them to do are things that they enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And the components I like to have them address include balance training, stretching, strength training, and some endurance work. And again, it depends on the patient. Some patients are so debilitated due to their underlying illness that a 2-minute little floor exercise is a really hard workout for them. Others, I can have them do a high intensity interval workout that will take them 15 minutes to do at maximal effort. 4 50-yard wind sprints could be really good. Or they might be doing free weights, body weight, yoga, tai chi, or they might be doing yoga, or they might be doing ballroom dancing,
Mm.
or they might be doing musical rehab. I think what I want to have people do is to find a physical activity that they enjoy and can sustain. And of course, right now with the COVID, we're discouraging people from going to the gyms. So I've been talking about right now, yoga at home, tai chi at home, doing body weight strength training exercises, and some balance training. That would be great.
Sure, sure. And then the final one is the mental part of it, like just really the mental stressors, which again are the good stuff. It's, I'm going to
Learning new
talk about
stuff.
that.
Learning new stuff, so learning, particularly if you learn a new motor skill, so that's really good. Learning how to juggle, that's very powerful. Learning a new crocheting or macrame or knitting technique, that's really good. There are many online games such as Luminosity, Brain Games, Brain Age. So these are really fun. It requires some learning, recall, new skill acquisition, learning a new language, Sudoku puzzles. There are a slew of print books on mind games. So there are a wide variety of ways to do this. It should be a little bit hard. If you're mentally exhausted, you took on too great a task or you worked at it for too long. And it's the same thing physically, because I don't want you to be so exhausted you can't function the rest of your day. I want it to be a little bit hard, that you need a little rest afterwards, then you can bounce up and get on with your day.
Yeah, learning a new language is also a good one.
That's a superb.
You just got to be disciplined to do it.
Yes, yes.
So there's also when you talk about, and this is a big one, sleep issues, and how, why is sleep so crucial to stress?
Well, it turns out all mammals need to sleep. Sleep is critical. And it's while we sleep that the brain is clearing out a bunch of the toxins, a bunch of the amyloid, and it's sort of, think of it as the wash cycle of the brain. If we don't sleep, we don't clear out those toxins. And we also know that if we don't sleep, we begin to hallucinate and become psychotic. And so within 48 hours, our mental functioning is severely compromised. Within 72 hours, we're clearly hallucinating and nearly always psychotic by then. So sleep is profound.
What would be some things that can help people sleep better? Because again, whether somebody's got a brain injury or not, there's a lot of people, my dad being one of them, he doesn't, a lot of times he doesn't sleep through the night. So you're not getting that.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that contribute to that. So if we go outside in the daylight during the day and get the bright sunlight into our eyes, that will help set the biologic clock to match the actual time clock. So that's step number one. And then next thing you can do is we have these artificial lights. And that artificial light sends a confusing signal to our biologic clock in the evening. Looking at our phones, looking at our televisions, our computer screens, sends more of this blue light that confuses the time clock of the brain. Our biology expects our core temperature to drop at night. And so because our homes are heated, our core temperature is not dropping during the night. That, again, compromises our sleep. We often have inconsistent times that we go to bed and times that we get up. We're exhausted during the day, so we compensate for that exhaustion by taking a lot of caffeine. And we take caffeine throughout the day, throughout the evening, and now it's difficult to fall asleep. We might be working out too late in the evening. So I go through a nice long list of strategies that you can use to improve your quality of sleep and make it more likely that you can fall asleep and stay asleep during the night.
Well, I had a practitioner last month ask me to test this out, and I have not been somebody that meditates. Being from the Northeast, my head's always going, my brain's always going. I'm always like thinking. So to kind of really be disciplined, and I gotta tell you, this is kind of cool. You should look into it. It's called Brain Tap. Did you ever
Oh,
see
yeah.
brain tapping? You ever see this thing? And I've been playing around with it. And what I try to do it is in the morning to get in a good mindset. And it's a program that's got 700 different things you could listen to. And again, this was so not me, and then I do it at night, and wow, doing some kind of guided meditation, the way it just calms me down before I go to sleep, it really is powerful. Like, I'm
Excellent.
like super excited about it. So now I'm like, wow, man, I think everybody could benefit from this if they're
Yeah.
having
Yes.
issues.
So there are a number of biofeedback devices. That's one of them
Mhm.
that can be very helpful at training meditation, helping to stimulate. Um, Heart Math is another one. There are a number of alpha wave stimulators. All of these are very useful. They're excellent, and they can certainly be explored. Doing a transcendental meditation, guided meditation, mindfulness without that fancy technology also works. It's a matter of what matches your personality and your personal preferences.
No, I totally agree. But as I said, getting back on with this stress topic, given again what's going on right now with the COVID-19, let alone if you have stuff on top of it that you're dealing with, this topic is super important. I love the way your book addresses it. I love the way you give the how-tos to utilize these various stressors to our advantage, but also explain again, more of the concerns when you're in that chronic stress and what it's doing to the body. You make it so easy to understand. And what I will say too is, when you write with such compassion to the reader. It's not any way like, because there's some big stuff in here. There's some significant changes that somebody may have to do, but you do it in honestly the most nice, understanding way. It's just beautiful, and it comes through in your writing. So
Oh, thank
I
you.
honestly, I couldn't recommend this book more highly. It's jam-packed with information. I love the way you evolved on topics. Story for another day, but even like mentioning the stem cells, because I am a recipient of intranasal stem cells, which were a game changer for me. But
Yeah.
just kind of, again, keeping an open mind to how everything evolves is really
Correct.
important for our
You know,
industry.
the half-life of our medical information is about 5 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's
So
big.
correct.
We got it. We got to keep it up.
We always have new insights, hopefully, if we're continuing to learn and to be open to expanding our thinking.
Well, like again, what is it? 2012 when they figured out. Well, the cranial osteopathy folks, they knew a long time ago that the brain had a lymphatic system, and traditional medicine just caught on that in the last handful of years. So again, we never know enough, and we'll never know it all. So we got to stay open to to this evolution in this industry. But I want to leave you with the final word. Let us know how people can get in touch with you. And
Yeah, so please come to terrywahls.com, Terry, Wahls, WAHLS.com. And if you go to terrywahls.com/diet, you can get a one-page summary that will give you a great little sheet to put on your refrigerator to begin eating the Wahls diet.
well, thank you so much. Dr. Wahls, thank you so much for giving me your time again. I lucked out getting you twice in 3 months. So
You're very welcome.
I couldn't hang on there for a minute, but thank you so much for joining, everyone. I appreciate it.